Well, hello, my name is SherriAnneDuffy-King, and I am reading The Title of a Crucified Innocence. It's book one of my series. I started this book about 15 years ago, and we're going to start off on chapter 31, Dubious Escapades. So please sit down and enjoy the adventure with me. Thank you. Chapter 31, Dubious Escapade. The deck of the Ecuadorian Siren gleamed as the sun's warmth kissed the wood. Amazed at what lay outside, reddish canyonscapes, huge pillars the size of slimmed down volcanoes, unable to see the bottom, as it was covered in crystal blue water. Looking further over the banister, mermaids carrying small spheres of fire on torch sticks. To get a better view of them, Evie rushed to the front of the ship and leaned over the edge. An underwater city surrounding a castle that must have been their capital. Utterly amazing. The life down below looked so peaceful, or what do they call them here? Sirens, Evie uttered aloud, astonished at their beauty. A school of them swam by. They all seemed to need to be somewhere, swimming pretty moderately. She was entranced. Something Evie didn't expect happened. The last siren turned and locked his eyes on her. Hunger rippling through his stomach. It launched itself at Evie, mouth open, rows of pointy shards headed for her neck. Eyes uncultivated, black and empty. Evie was getting sick of getting the short end of the stick. Something in her snapped. She had had enough. Less than a foot away from her, Evie raised her right hand into a fist, and out of instinct she defended herself and sucker punched the creature in the side of what resembled a jaw. Its face ricocheting off of her knuckles, and he fell back into the water. Evie backed away from the edge, bumping into a stunned, swashbuckling buccaneer, his eyes wide. I'm truly sorry you had to see that, but I'm kind of sick of being attacked and kidnapped, living in this world that is cold and full of suffering. I feel like my mind is truly lost and paralyzed. I hate feeling like a waste. I'm too young. I belong to no one but myself. Where is the captain's quarters? Stumbling and fumbling over his words, I saw the siren coming at you in midair. I came to help you, but now I know you can handle any situation. His quarters is at the end of the ship, fancy golden design carved into his door. With a wry smile, he added, "You can't miss it." Evie smiled back. "Thank you, sir." Then politely bowed. Evie turned and left. Minutes later, Evie found the door and tapped lightly. "Come in, Lady Evie Trinity Bridgewater." The voice was soft and slowly spoken, with great patience and wisdom. The cabin room was dark and full of dust that settled on everything. A fragile old gentleman sat in a huge desk chair overlooking tons of maps and papers sprawled out over the desk. A huge window letting warmth flood in from behind him. This man looked oddly familiar. The way his jaw clenched and his bony webbed fingers, Evie wished she could remember. "Come sit, dearest Evie." Evie followed his finger to one of the two chairs sitting across from him. Picking one, sitting, leather upholstery squeaking at her movement. The older man giggled. Evie smiled at him, a little embarrassed. "My name is Alfazor. Most of my friends call me Alfie." Evie listened patiently. "You, I hope, will become one of my friends. Evie, it is my duty to protect you and get you to safety." "Thank you for your kindness and great generosity. I also hope we can become good friends, Captain Alfie." He smiled heartily. Then they parted. Evie went to her room to rest and try to configure all the events in this wacky place. Chapter 32. Uneasy Chills. Finding Iola's letter gave off a bad vibe, one that was misleading. Walking over to Iola's bay window to stare out, a giant flying creature headed toward the death forest. Blonde flames flying in the wind. Iola's headed to Ollivander's citadel. Turning away from the window, Aiden reached for a plate of meat and slid into the corner. Then he returned to the window. Something inside him was twisting and turning, his heart like a wet rag. I'm sorry for the interruption. My child was done. Aiden reached, this is continuation of 32, alright? Aiden reached for some silver dust and tossed a handful out the window, whistling, and he dives out, running down the side of the dark castle tower, headed for the ground, running so fast that as he dives through the dust, his body morphing and changing into a lichen. Dark fur slithers over his skin, nose stretches out. 10 feet from the ground, he hops off of the building, leaping into a loop front flip and landing perfectly on Ithaca's back. He leans forward and whispers, "Right yonder, Ithaca. We need to beat SherriAnneDuffy-King pronto." Ithaca moved faster than usual, but since time was against him, Aiden sprinkled some dust under her sides. Black feathered wings grew 20 feet in comparison on each side of her. They lifted and were off. Flying through the clouds, he pulled out Iola's letter to him and reread it for some clues. General Aiden McTavish, urgent. I have left to travel for a while in my forest. I'm sad to say I will not be getting married. I need time to heal from my broken heart. Took my 2 Padawan. Take care of my dozens or so munchkins and castle's duty till I return. Sire of SherriAnneDuffy, King Iola's. Landing Ithaca under the similar window to Iola's. Wait, lass, he says. Then he stood on her saddle and jumped onto the wall, where he landed on his stomach. He pushed himself to his feet and dug up the sides of the tower. At the top, he jumped through the window head first and rolled into a crab walk crawl. Up alone in the tower stood Akmalutra, looking at Aiden. Aiden shimmied a cold spurt through the tips of his skin, pulling in his fur and nose. He handed his note to the king and conversed for a while, debriefing him through the current events of climbing up the building. General, we must leave immediately. Up to the window flew Sire Akmalutra's red-scaled dragon. He hopped on. Then up came Ithaca, after the long-necked dragon moved away from the window, both men seated and flying toward the death forest. They got there too late, but decided to follow the ship, staying near the border of Mbala as close as they could, watching and waiting. Chapter 33. Mistaken Identities. As soon as Elder rose, Iola's waited for Evie to leave her room. He stays to the shadows. A girl comes out and sits on deck staring at the planet Eldor, completely conversed in water, but lights up the evening sky. He sneaks carefully behind her while she's in thought, one silent step at a time. Good bait. As he moves so quick and grasps her neck and snaps it, killing her instantly. He turns her to face him directly. Better to be rid me of you before you get to be trouble. Then tosses her over the banister into the water. He expects a splash but gets none. Peeking over the edge, he sees the siren who was sucker punched earlier today. Face swollen and eyes orange. Unlike human, sirens swell and turn orange when bruised. He caught her and brought her under to Archimeda, his home, to share with family and eat. Iolaus sneaks back into the shadows and waits for her again. 30 minutes later, light spills from the cabin door onto the deck. Chapter 34. Beautiful Remembrance. Evie was passed a note after dinner to meet Gabriella on deck. Under the water punnet she called Eldor. Pleased that she made it on deck first, Evie began to think and experience all of the beauty Amballa's world had to offer. Stopped at the banister, she looked up at Eldor, and all the stars. Flying creatures soar through the night. Peace came over her when she saw a red-scaled dragon soar in front of Eldor, breathing fire and calling for its mate. Evie couldn't help but think of Aiden. She may dislike his motives and actions, but Evie could never truly hate Aiden. Looking down over the banister, Evie could see Archimeda, the underwater castle and city. Glowing torches looked like dancing fireflies in late spring, early summer at home. A smoky substance swirls in the water, and a face comes up through it. It's that siren, eyes changing quickly from orange to black and teeth dripping blood. It stuck its hands up onto the ship and started to climb through suction. Evie jumped back when she saw it moving pretty quickly toward her. Evie wasn't prepared to fight a siren. She was in her nightgown, silky and white, low-cut, barefoot, hair undressing, gleaming in the light from Eldor. Chapter 35. Deceit. Watching Evie step out of the light onto the deck gave Iolaus a rewarding feeling. Shutting the door behind her, light diminished. She walked over to the banister, looking up, bathing in the light from Eldor. She looked too lavish. White silk gown hanging to her every curve, barefoot, hair loose and brushed. All too tempting, her skin glowing as she stood and thought. Iolaus crept up behind her, tablet in the folds of his middle finger and ring finger, only a couple of feet behind her. She jumps back into his embrace, pill going into her mouth as she almost shrieks, holding firmly on her mouth and over her body. Iolaus watched the pill dissolve on her tongue. Neon purple and blue spill from Evie's mouth down her throat. She struggles as he pulls her into the storeroom, fear tingling through her and changes where the power rippling. She struggles as Iolaus pulls her into the storeroom, also her, and changes the power rippling of lime tin off her skin. The sensation was tantalizing, almost paralyzing. It was a rush. Iolaus let her go. She turned around and her face lights up, but turns to upset. Why did you leave me? How could you leave me with a total stranger? Iolaus knew she was seeing someone else in him, so he played to her rules. I'm sorry, Evie. I tried to protect you, and I couldn't bear to be away from you. 'Tis no excuse for my actions. I know I was wrong. She looked up at him, her brain registering it all to keep things moving. Please forgive me. When I'm with you, our bodies are close, my fingers wandering the great unknown. Kissing you, holding you, touching you, Evie, makes the old me die inside and the new me come alive. She stands on her tiptoes and lightly brushes Iolaus' hair away from his eyes, her own full of love. Iolaus never felt love before. She was opening new feelings he had never realized were possible to feel. Iolaus imagined the looks he was getting from her were really meant for him. Her hand sliding up and through Iolaus' hair, then down his neck under his ear to caress his stubble on his chin. She kissed Iolaus gently. He felt cool sparks ripple through his lips. Iolaus moved his hands over her curves and down her thighs, sliding the material up and holding her with her legs locked around his waist. Outside, thunder rattled the sky and rain began to pour heavily, walking her to a stack of unmarked bags. Iolaus kissed Evie harder, feeling the passion she was making him experience in her. Sliding inside of her, pressing gently at first, her breathing scattered and learning to deal with pain. Inside her and being a part of her, Iolaus felt a bait, less of a man, only pulsating, passionate vibes a god or someone worthy of this woman should feel. Hand moving down her breast to rest on her abdomen, thrusting as light flickered through the window, showing her even more radiantly. Her eyes lighting with flames of fluorescent purple and blue, color showing full of passion, abating Iolaus to continue harder and faster. She was truly awoken, and Iolaus was the first to witness as her muscles opened and tightened in a rhythmic beat. Then, as he was about to finish, she stretched upward, grabbing onto Iolaus' shoulder and biting down like a primitive animal, suppressing a moan but failing. Her fingers and teeth drawing blood. Something happened. Pulling back, her eyes went all black, then normal. Her face, which held ecstasy and love for who she thought Iolaus was, turned into a look of fear and disgusted pain. The tablet was wearing off. "'Tis done, Evie. I have taken you. In our world, this is a union of marriage. I told you I would have you. I stopped for nothing, as I always get what I want." Boy, Iolaus missed the look he beheld for him before, full of wanting. But in his eyes she would learn to love. As he has made her his, Iolaus thought greedily as she turned her green eyes away from his. "'Tis done, love." Chapter 36. Time to Rise. Thunderous lightning shattered webs of white jagged lines across the rugged billowless clouds that etched across Eldor, covering as much of its illuminous water reflection as possible, leaving no possible light from the stars that hid in fright. Loud booming crackled, meeting the sight with heavenless noise. On the ship, light imploded. Waves of lime that rippled to the surface of the ship, waves pulsating, moving the rushing water in a rhythmic motion. Big reoccurring waves brushing the shoreline, repetitive, the exterior too inferior to notice what was going on. Something definitely was wrong. Taking a handful of magic dust, shaking it hesitant in his palms, with his thumbs against his sullen lips. Before anything, Aiden pauses to think, closing his eyes once more to remember Evie, running toward him, then another with her before him, cheeks going aflame. He remembers holding her gently against the bookstand and tapestry, kissing her gently, then carrying her in his arms down dark tunnels as her head rested against his chest. The lavender and white wine scent fill his lungs as he sucks in the words, "Alaric Talwire," then blue. Both his clasped fingers released and pulled apart as far as they could to reveal a crow pressing from the balls of his wrists, right here. Pressing further out of Aiden's skin, the crow wiggled forward. "Warn her," was all he has to tell his crow named Alaric in a hushed whisper, for the bird was quickly in flight and on its way to deliver the humble message. Alaric the crow slithered and skirted past oncoming waves of warm, passionate ripples, dodging with wings spread, light glistening off of them, long, wrinkled legs pulled in. Boom! He crashed into the side of the ship, vanishing into its requiem, leaving a dark, hazy smoke in its place. There Lucinda sleeps, as if she herself were a grand statue of art, full of beauty and glowing wisdom. Eyes whitened, eyelids spread open, images flickered between her crystalline lenses and corneas. Seconds before the mushroom boom, she sits up, eyes still flickering in the dark and unknown place. Something is wrong. Fate has misdealt us. Reaching out and up instinctively to retrieve the black crow. Thank you, Alaric Talwire. As the small, glistening bird lands on her palm, she slams her hand down, smashing him back into silver magic dust and black smoke, then blowing what made him all over her tiny, one-window room, taking what was left from him and sprinkling the dust above her silhouette to shrink and grow wings. Then she fluttered through the wall like a ghost, leaving a white, dusty cloud in her place. On the other side, she got knocked off balance by the immense tidal wave of wind, thrusting her to shore, landing in a tree. A bit dazed and confused, waves rippled out of the exterior of the ship, then boom! One huge wave shoots and hits all plant life, similar to a mushroom cloud, pushing a huge gust of wind, blowing all leaves, dirt, and debris everywhere. The gust slithered through the trees and immense waves on the ocean. All goes dark. One of Iolus's henchmen slithers onto the side of the deck. Padawa, shapeshifter from a large snake into a four-headed flying serpent dragon, scales glistening in the lightning storm. Aiden watched as Iolus drags Evie by the wrist like a rag doll, her skin glowing through her white nightgown, something deep inside of him raising rage to the surface of his skin. Iolus yanks her on top of the beast's back as it's about to raise and leave, its tail coyly slithering off the deck into the swarm of sirens. Ambushed, the beast accidentally knocks Evie and Iolus from the saddle. Every siren was preoccupied with the Padawa. The diversion helped Iolus drag Evie through the murky water unnoticed, crawling toward land. Let's recap what happened between that and when Evie found out Iolus was him. Alright? This goes back a little bit. Chapter 37, World So Cold. Evie stared blankly at the very man who betrayed her. She had given all of herself to this man whom she thought she loved. Rage ignited inside of her, filtering through her veins, until Evie couldn't conceal or control her most dangerous, primitive instinct. Disgusted, her hand swooshed through the darkened storage room to land perfect against his muscular cheekbone. The sound of his skin slapping under her palm made a horrific sound Evie's never been accustomed to. Here. Pure stubbornness filled him. Evie couldn't see him all too well in the dark. A candle flickered in the edge of the room. His palms clenched around her skin of her shoulders and brought her in for another possessive kiss. Tears started to trickle down Evie's cheeks as his arms slid further around her, tightening. "Surrender all your dreams to me tonight," he whispered after kissing Evie. "No." Evie squirmed but couldn't break his embrace. "I'm losing my patience. You are mine whether you like it or not." Evie finally pushed him off of her, knocking her off balance into a pile of stacked sacks of food. "Open your eyes. You have betrayed my first trust." Looking cynically into her eyes. "And what is that?" Curiosity soon filled over the cynical in his eyes. "You can't have it both ways. You've done some taking, now it's time to give." With that, Evie jumped to her feet and tried to rush past him toward the door. Evie's folly decision was thwarted. Fingers almost grasped around the knob. Evie was twirled around. his fingers around her wrist and waist, pulling her back to the sacks, dropping Evie on her knees and hands. Almost time, I promise. Evie turned to face Iolaus. Knock me down, I'm bound to get back on my feet again. His lips raised. I know, that's why I like you so very much. Then, without hesitation, he grasps Evie's palm, pulling her up to drag her out the doorway into open rain onto the deck. A huge snake morphed into a four-headed dragon, keeping its slimy tail. Iolaus' grip clenched even tighter around Evie's wrist. Puddles splashed under her feet in the deck as rain showered around them. Iolaus pushed Evie onto the great beast's back and crawled behind her onto the saddle. The giant monster started to lift off the deck when they were pulled and shoved off of his back into icy cold murky water. Evie's whole body began to sink. Under the water she watched as the creature was ripped apart under the water. She also noticed the thick blades coming from the sirens' tails. Nothing like fairy tales. Shards spiked out of their tails, slicing through flesh-and-blood-induced water. Some of them opened their mouths, releasing 3 rows of white teeth, now stained burgundy. Still sinking lower and lower until Iolaus grasps her wrist and drags her above the water for oxygen. Evie tried to take her first gulp of air, but gets yanked quickly through the water, or waves of untamed water and blankets of rain, sheathed with lightning filtering through the air. Ahead the shore brings partial safety. Iolaus drags Evie to the sand and quickly takes bits from her ripped nightgown and ties up her wrists and ankles, leaving Evie to cry and stay put. From Evie's viewpoint, she watched helpless, as if she even cared if they died. That's how outraged she felt. Evie hoped they both became sliced pieces of poultry. Another gasp of air, and Evie almost coughed up a whole water supply. This is ridiculous. Life from this point on seems pointless. Pain riveted from her body. Oh Lord, help me, please. Evie begged, just about to give up on life. Splashing waves caught her attention. Glancing down at her feet might have been the worst mistake so far. Webbed fingers clung to mounds of sand and rocks as it began to crawl toward her. Evie let out a scream that startled even herself. Chapter 38, Going Down. More thunderous sounds shattered the silence of the heaving storm's cries. Iolaus quickly bound Evie, only after gaining a glance of Akmalutra. A sinister smile spread over Iolaus' face as he quickly glanced down at his handy knots on Evie's security. She wasn't smiling, her eyes only infuriated and glinting lime fire. His smile dropped to a frown, then pulled back up to a seriously straight line. Now it was time to finish this feud. Aki, so good to see you. How have you met my new bride? Pointing toward Evie with the blade of his sword. I will kill you for this, Iolaus. Akmalutra spat. Anger flared in his nostrils as far as fur and steam rose off of his body. Black and yellow flames of fur drenched in rain. Iolaus laughed into the oncoming drops of heaven's tears. Iolaus' flame coat and Akmalutra's black coat. They both ran daringly at each other, swords drawn, blades slicing through drops of rain, knocking the tears off course and flying in midair. Akmalutra would spur Iolaus' blade, and Iolaus would pull all defenses, then rush him again. Akmalutra would then also spin in his defense and then go for the kill, only to be defeated. At one point the blades met and held their position, both not budging. Finally, when the pressure was too great, lightning crashed down on the metal and shattered the blades, knocking them back. The two feuding twins turned to hand combat, both bloody and preoccupied with each other. Angry bursts of lightning touched down, igniting different areas of the ground. Trees split in half, and char slid down the trunks, leaving drenched, seeping paths of distorted black death behind. All went quiet, for the only thing that filtered the air was a blood-curdling scream. Both stopped and looked in the direction. Standing between the scream and them was Aiden McTavish. Hair soaked, eyes piercing blue, beard rough and stubbly, catching bits of raindrops. Aiden flipped his head in Evie's direction, wanting to help but being stuck between a hard place and a rock. Chapter 39. Unbearable Desertion. Blood-curdling screams is what rushed past Evie's lips toward the surface. The creature grasped onto her leg and began to pull itself closer to her, its tail flailing like an excited puppy's, swooshing through the rain. Terror filled her mind. If only her hands weren't bound and her legs weren't wrapped together. Evie could kick if they were free. Arms almost translucent, its webbed, suction-cupped fingers tightening like leeches around Evie's ankle. It started to get closer. Its hands started to climb up her legs and onto her outer thighs. The siren was almost completely on top of her. It wheezed with hunger, Evie's eyes shimmering with delight. Evie turned her face toward the fight and tried to shimmy away. The first thing she noticed was Aiden, eyes wide and longing to help. Evie's heart lifted to the sight of him, then sank. Was he the last thing she would enjoy seeing before she died? The whizzing got louder. Evie turned her head back to the siren, rows of teeth glinting in the lightning. It raised its head, mouth wide and dripping with drool, yellow drool. Some of its saliva landed right next to her head and began sizzling. It was acid. The ground beneath Evie began to move. The siren was using its bladed fin to drag her to the water. As its head began to sink down, Evie cringed. The teeth barred down on her flesh. Warm blood seeped down her skin, igniting the ground, lighting up the creature's face, its lips resting on her neck. The pain dulled as its acidic saliva slipped into her bloodstream. When its head raised in delight, his lips drenched in glowing lime, satisfaction tipped his lips in a horrendous smile. It dipped its head again, this time sliding its webbed fingers under Evie and holding her tight. Evie coughed up pain and bits of blood. Everything began to get dizzy. Evie's eyes rolled back into her scalp. He raised his head once more to scream an unnatural scream. Then a blade flickered in the lightning light and took his head clean off. Standing over Evie was a sight for sore eyes. Lucinda's hair blowing in the rain, eyes white and tightly wielding a pretty sharp desolate blade. Chapter 40, Tainted Love. When Evie lifted her eyes, she saw Aiden once more lifting her in his arms and carrying her close to his heart. Evie rested her head against him. Water drenched her white silky nightgown, and they were close. The moisture between them began to warm up. Evie locked her arms around his neck as he walked her toward Ithaca, or at least Evie thought it was Ithaca. She had gigantic black wings. Drops of rain teetered off of them, making them glisten. On top of her sat Lucinda. The only thing Evie could say, she remembered, was Aiden placing her in the arms of Lucinda and patting the horses behind, signaling Ithaca to leave. Still dazed and lost, Evie grasped onto Aiden's shirt and wouldn't release him. He unclinched Evie, then kissed her and gently rubbed her cheek. "I will always find my way back to you, to your heart, Evie." Then they were mid-flight. Evie screamed his name as thunder shook the very atmosphere and lightning recolored the darkened clouds. "Aiden, no! Please, dear Lord, no! Stay with me. Imagine me screaming that, okay? Because I'm not going to scream that right now. That's a little dramatic, and it's late at night. Evie begged. From a distance, Aiden became as small as an ant. The last thing that caught her eyes before stress and loss of blood overtook her was the sight of Iolaus and Akamalutra staring blankly, rain drenching their bruises and cuts. Looking up at Evie as she left, one last thunderous bolt sent Evie into an overwhelmed slumber. Chapter 41, Emptiness. Aiden watched as Evie screamed a most horrific cry toward him. Her hand extended as she left his view to the Elven Requiem sanctuary. He wasn't really all that concerned about his safety. She was all that mattered. He even kept staring up into the rain and war-painted sky, looking at nothing and everything at the same time. The thunder closed off all senses as he fell numb to her departure. The last thing he remembered was the cracking noise under the back of his shattered scalp, cracking under an extent of force. Chapter 42, Revelations. Both Akamalutra and Iolaus knew Aiden to be a double spy, although not for each other. Akamalutra sent Aiden to spy on Iolaus, but never knew he himself was also being spied upon by Iolaus. But now they knew it was clearly confirmed. General Aiden McTavish was a traitor and must be dealt with. Iolaus spun toward Akamalutra, smiling, gleaming, while devilishly devising a perfect plan. Aki, you take him and we'll punish him together. Of course, we hang him. But when we do hang him, I want to be seated upon my Padua Lycos to watch the festivities. His lips straightened to a serious expression as he thought. Now, they thought he was a double spy, but they didn't realize that he was a triple spy until just now. Then after a minute of listening to his thoughts, his face gave a certain misconception that turned his lips upward again. What malice do you plan, Iolaus? Akamalutra felt skeptical of his brother's bounding friendliness. None, I just don't want to waste such entertainment. Akamalutra, still skeptical of his brother's devious plans, decided to take a chance at trust, even if it did give him satisfaction. His mind relieved to get some dirty work handled and out of the way. Okay, Iolaus, I see your point. Let's torture and question him together for fun. Water drenching Iolaus and Akamalutra's fur as rain poured in immense masses. They whistled for Iolaus's remaining Padua Lycos, who soared through the rain to his master's commands.